Member for Hastings, Lennox, Addington.
Mr. Speaker, I am happy to be sharing my time with the member for Saanich Gulf Islands. As we know, rapid global climate change is occurring, which will have far-reaching impacts on society, biodiversity, and ecosystems. You have only to look at my own riding of Hastings, Lennox, and Addington, which stretches from Lake Ontario to Algonquin Park, Provincial Park, where this summer, for the first time ever, a level of 3 low water condition was declared by the Quinte Conservation and the low water response team. This is the most severe low water level. In parts of my region, we have experienced the driest summer since 1888. The rivers are so low that conservationists had to go out with nets this summer to rescue fish trapped in tiny ponds caused by the historic low water levels. The effects of climate change in my community are real. I can't tell you how many times I've witnessed farmers pulling tanks of water multiple times a day in order to get enough to take care of their livestock. Wells have dried out earlier than anyone can remember. This year, those conversations about the weather that take place in coffee shops everywhere across my community have taken on a sadder, more ominous tone. People are worried. Mr. Speaker, there are people who know, these are people who know the land well and take pride in being the caretaker of their farms to protect it for the next generation. I've also met with countless people from a wide cross-section of businesses, and they've told me their efforts they are taking to adapt to and tackle climate change. Farmers, businesses, community organizations, and ordinary Canadians are all showing real leadership in combating climate change. Our government should do the same. Increasingly, protected areas are being recognized for the important role they play in adapting to and mitigating climate change. There are many ways in which they will form a part of our natural solution to climate change, through the actions of our municipal, provincial, territorial, and federal departments, agencies, and of course, Indigenous peoples, and also private landowners and not-for-profits. Canada has a long tradition of establishing and managing protected areas, whether in the form of national and provincial parks, national wildlife areas, migratory bird sanctuaries, marine protected areas, ecological or nature reserves. Protected areas in Canada safeguard important ecosystems and habitat, maintain essential ecosystems services, and provide opportunities for personal connections with nature. Protected areas strengthen both our ecological and social resilience to climate change. Like so many Canadians, Mr. Speaker, I grew up inspired by the wilderness that surrounds us. I have many fond memories of hiking around the forests in Madoc, where I grew up, and of taking my own kids to Bon Echo Provincial Park in the north part of my riding near Cloyne. Those who have visited Bon Echo might have seen the pictograph markings on the spectacular cliff face that show us that there are places like this through time and across culture which draw us in and which show us that there is much to learn from our natural environment. It is fitting that these very old Indigenous pictographs in Bon Echo show us how Nanabush, the trickster figure who was sent by the Gitche Manitou to teach the Ojibwe people and who named the plants and animals around us. We still have a lot to learn. I know I do. And the more I speak to the Indigenous peoples, both in my riding and in my work as an MP, the more I know for certain that there is much we can learn from them about protecting our lands and waters. Water is sacred, and it gives life. Protecting our watersheds, we protect the life that springs up around them. Yet up to 70% of historic wetlands have been filled in or drained in settled parts of Canada, particularly the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence region. This contributes to some of the terrible flooding that we have seen along places like Moira River and Thurlow and Tweed, where a short few years ago, historic spring flooding forced the community to come together to fight against the rising water. The community did come together because that's what neighbors do. But these types of events have a very large economic cost to them. By protecting our wetlands and allowing them to do their job of natural flood mitigation, water purification, and provision of wildlife habitat, we not only live in better harmony with our environment, but we also save money too. And we ensure that people continue to benefit from the services that are supported by healthy and diverse terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Protected areas also support the capture and storage of carbon in terrestrial and marine vegetation, soils, and peat. Conserving and protecting natural areas help to maintain their ability to sequester carbon and avoid greenhouse gas emissions that come from disturbance. It has been estimated that 15% of the world's terrestrial carbon stock, as 312 gigatons, are stored in protected areas around the world. In Canada, over 4 billion tons of carbon dioxide is sequestered in 39 of our national parks. We know that climate change will also increase the risk of extinction for many species. Projected temperature increases may exceed the biological tolerances of many species and ecosystems in Canada. A large, connected, and diverse network of protected areas can help wildlife to adapt to a rapidly changing climate by ensuring that the loss of suitable habitat is offset by access to other similar habitat. It will ensure that areas of refuge from climate change impacts are identified and protected for species to migrate to. The preamble to the Paris Agreement notes the importance of ensuring the integrity of all ecosystems, including oceans, and the protection of biodiversity when taking action to address climate change. Article 5.1 of the same agreement requires parties to take action to conserve and enhance sinks and reservoirs of greenhouse gases. Last year, Canada adopted the 2020 Biodiversity Goals and Targets for Canada, which describe results to be achieved through collective efforts of public and private players. Canada's targets are aligned with the global targets in 2010 under the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, which include a commitment to conserve by 2020 at least 17% of terrestrial areas and inland water, and 10% of coastal and marine areas through networks of protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. This target presents a powerful and timely opportunity for Canada to make progress and demonstrate leadership on climate change and on biodiversity conservation. At the end of 2015, only 10.6% of Canada's terrestrial areas and 0.9% of its marine territory were recognized as protected so far. Parks Canada and Environment and Climate Change Canada are working with provinces and territories to develop a pathway to achieving the land-based target. And on World Oceans Day in 2016, the Government of Canada announced a 5-point plan to meet marine targets to increase marine and coastal protection to 5% by 2017 and 10% by 2020. This plan includes establishing areas already under development, including 5 proposed marine protected areas under the Oceans Act. Also being explored are possibilities to establish new Ocean Act marine protected areas in pristine offshore areas and in areas under pressure from human activities, and to identify existing and establish new other affected area-based conservation measures, such as fisheries closures to protect sensitive coral and sponge concentrations. Budget 2016 has allocated $81.3 million over 5 years to Fisheries and Ocean Canada and Natural Resources Canada to support this effort. Budget 2016 also proposed more than $42 million over 5 years for Parks Canada to continue to work to create the Taidene National Park Reserve in the Northwest Territories and a new National Marine Conservation Area in Nunavut's Lancaster Sound. To sum up, Mr. Speaker, healthy, biologically diverse ecosystems increase climate resilience. They reduce the vulnerability of communities to climate change and increase their capacity to recover from climate change impacts. The careful management and expansion of our protected areas networks will help Canada protect our biodiversity and help us to succeed in the fight against climate change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Yellowhead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, the Honourable Member across the road, for his speech. Been enjoying working with him on the Environment Committee. The question is to him, if we were to adapt the carbon pricing mechanisms that will help realize Canada's international commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, should selection of these mechanisms take into consideration the actions of competitor jurisdictions and the impact on Canada's global compliance?
The honourable member for Hastings, Lennox, Addington.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question, and I, as he, really do enjoy working with him on the Environment Committee. We do some great work together. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is all part and parcel of the process, right? Canada needs to provide leadership in the world today to try to use that moral suasion to get all of our member countries in the world to meet targets that will help us to reduce the impacts of climate change. So yeah, that is very important work that our government is doing, but you can't lead from behind. You have to get out in front and lead in the front, and that's what these changes that we're proposing will enable us to do, to take that leadership position in the world and to provide an example to the rest of the world that even though our impact may be minimal from an overall climate standpoint, our impact from a leadership standpoint can be huge. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his speech. The big trick on this idea is to, in effect, price the value of what ecosystems do. So in the case of swamps, what's the value of sequestration of carbon? In the case of, say, forest canopy, what's the value in having an effective forest canopy, particularly in urban setting? So I'd be interested in the honourable member's commentary as to how this Paris Agreement moves that calculation forward so that there is a value attributed to carbon sequestration, there is a value attributed to forest canopy.
The honourable member for Hastings, Lennox, Addington.
Well, I'd like to thank the member for his excellent question. Right now, actually, our Environment Committee is studying protected lands, and we have seen the tremendous value that protected lands can provide in carbon sequestration and capture. And myself, you know, in meeting with the Woodlot Association of Ontario just on the weekend, many other groups, part of the Paris Agreement is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and that really does work into you know, sustainability within society as a whole, and the protected lands and areas, wetlands, etc., play a key part in us attaining that sustainability. Sustainability through carbon sequestration, sustainability through putting a price on carbon so that the value of that carbon sequestration can be realized. So all of these things fit together in this puzzle of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for South Surrey, White Rock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much for your comments. And just talking about sustainability and ensuring that wetlands and ecosystems are protected, are you aware that there are many cities across this country that have sustainability charters in place that address those issues and have been addressing them for quite some time? And just wondering, and also through the FCM and every provincial organization that deals with cities and municipalities. Can you tell me how this is going to fit into the entire picture without reinventing the wheel and without the federal government getting involved in what's already going on?
Before the honourable member gets up, I'm sure the honourable member from White Rock meant, Mr. Speaker, through the Speaker, not asking the Speaker to ask the question. The honourable member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Well, once again, I would like to thank the member for her question. Also a great question. I mean, this federation, the last time I looked, was a partnership, right? I think that's one aspect that has been missing for some time. And so our government wants to, once again, be a leader on the climate file. And that means working with our provincial counterparts, municipal counterparts, private landowners, different organizations like the Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited, anybody that we can in order to, one, create a map of where these lands are. They're protected both municipally, provincially, federally, and these private organizations, so that we can get a better understanding of just what are the protected areas that exist in our country so that we can, once again, make them part of the climate resiliency a plan that our government is putting forward. So it's about the partnership, and the federal government wants to be a part of that partnership, wants to be a leader in that partnership. Thank you.
Resuming debate, the honourable member